This is kind of a hard thing for me to admit. I've always been big on voting, and I thought it was of the utmost importance. And I've never missed the opportunity to vote from the moment I was old enough. I've always said, you can't bitch about politics if you didn't vote, and I love to bitch, so I've always voted. But I changed my mind on all of it, and in this video, I'll give you my reasons why. The hysterics around voting have always been there. Seemingly every election is the most important one of our lifetime. But something has happened over the last 15 years that cannot be ignored and is essential to understanding why I'm abandoning the voting process. It is a pill that is hard to swallow and accept, but is nevertheless true. In 2022, we do not have an opposition party in the United States anymore. In years past, I would always scoff at midwits who said that the parties were the same. Like, come on. There's huge, massive disparities that clearly have an impact on our quality of lives and really matter. But as time goes on, and as more and more examples of Republicans caving and voting in line with liberals, it has become impossible to ignore the obvious. The Republicans are not an opposition party with serious intentions of reversing what the left is doing and has done, and in many cases they vote directly in lockstep with them. Recently, at a town hall meeting I attended before the midterms, I heard some older folks murmuring and wondering if the Republicans would try and impeach Biden if there indeed was a red wave and they took control of Congress. This is clearly fantasy talk. But it's not fantasy, though. It's what the party would do if they were serious about changing things, but they're not. And so we are back to it being a fantasy. This latest debacle over choosing McCarthy as Speaker of the House has really sealed the deal for me. He is now the leader of the Republicans, and his voting record looks like this. This is not what an opposition leader's resume looks like. Apparently, there are only 6 Republicans in the whole House who agree with us on that. The other 200 are traitors. If we go back to when Obama was elected and the Democrats took control of both sides of Congress and the Supreme Court, the Tea Party became this lightning rod for the grassroots anger and frustration that many Americans felt towards the current path of the country. In the 2010 midterms, when the Republicans took the House back, the opposition party, quote unquote, was still not as effective as most conservatives wished it were. And the retort we got back was this: well, we're only 1/2 of 1/3, and there's only so much we could do here. And it's so important that we get more power. And we need the presidency for things to change. And so after years of dedicated fighting and suffering through a destructive 8-year-long Obama administration, and through some sort of miracle, we did get total power. Under Trump and Paul Ryan, now Republicans could go hog wild in getting everything we ever wanted, right? Well, you would think that if the Republicans were actually interested in opposing the left. And looking back, we know that they did absolutely nothing. The Paul Ryans and John McCains and Mitt Romneys and Susan Collinses came out of the woodworks to derail our own side's movement. There's this common way to view the left and right, which is that the left is the gas and constantly pushing for the things that they want, and the right is the brakes. And you see this in the campaigns. The left campaigns on what they're going to do, and the right campaigns on how they're going to stop what the left wants to do. But if you want a true opposition party, you're looking for a party that wants to be the reverse gear. Not only slow down the left, but swing things completely the other way. And based on 10,000 examples over the last 10 years alone, we clearly don't have that in the Republican Party as it stands. As a Republican, your life is nothing but disappointment after disappointment as your own party sells you down the river. Every issue is a chance for a Republican to cuck and be a wimp and capitulate to the left and barely do anything to stop them. Then, when election season comes around, they strategically pick up the language of us, the far right, and they promise to fight for us and pass common sense policy. And then when we elect them, they flip on their values and stab us all in the back. This is the current cycle of conservative politics, and I'm over it, and I'm done participating in it. Let's take Jerry Moran for an example. He's my state senator. In his campaigning, He repeatedly used inflation and out-of-control spending as a talking point. If you elect me, he says, I'll put an end to reckless spending by the Biden administration. And then, 1 month after he's elected, he votes for the giant $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that gives $45 billion more dollars to the rat Zelensky and Ukraine, bringing the total that we've gave to Ukraine up to $100 billion. And Jerry Moran has voted for every single penny of that he could. And I held my nose and I voted for Moran, even though he wasn't the ideal candidate, because on paper, he should have been better than the Democrat that he's running against. But is he, though? At this point, if you look through the hysterics hard enough, you realize that there really is no meaningful difference between the Democrat candidate and the Republicans. Republicans are diet liberals, and even though they don't vote, 100% in lockstep with them, give them just 10 years, and they will anyways. They literally just use our pain and suffering as talking points. They use the decline of our nation as just a grift. They use our issues to pander to us and promise us action, but when the rubber meets the road, they flip and they betray us over and over and over, and I'm done with it. You notice how there's 10,000 rhinos, but there's never a dino? No Democrat ever does this. There still may be some usefulness in voting in local elections that somewhat shield you from the tyranny at the top. But the days of going in and voting for a candidate that represents you and actually fights for you in Washington are over, and they are never coming back. The hard truth is that your Republican senator is most likely a representative for the military-industrial complex and the defense industry, and not you, the average citizen. Politics are like the WWE, and voters are like the 11-year-old boy who watches it in earnest. The moves seem real, the plot twists seem real, the drama seems real, and yet we know it's all staged. I want voting to work. I want to believe in the system, but there are too many externalities at this point to keep believing in what is clearly fantasy. For one, lobbyists and donors exist, who clearly influence politicians and their votes much more than I ever could. I watched a video of a guy who called every state's representatives and senators. Sometimes he'd get a letter back and it was clearly just copy pasta. And he never talked to the congressman. He simply talked to an uninterested staffer, because even the staffer knows that this is a scam. It might as well be a hotline for Santa, for kids who still think he's real. That's the level of fantasy that we're at right now. And thanks to censorship on this platform, I'm not even going to get into the issues I have with how the voting process works these days. But the censorship alone should tell you everything you need to know about the games being played. In summary, my position is this. Let's just take the Flight 93 election as an example. That analogy runs on the assumption that if we took control of the cockpit, we'd save ourselves. But experience is showing that it doesn't matter if we get control of the plane or not. We are going down. The Republicans just want to be the pilot that drives it all into the ground. For the past year, I have been ranting about the problems of democracy. And somehow, in my mind, voting is kind of like the final boss I have to defeat. Or there will be this big blind spot in my worldview where democracy's bad, and yet I still go vote every single election. So what would it take for me to vote again? Well, voting would have to be in person and on paper ballots only. No mail-in ballots. Not everybody would get to vote either. You would have to take a literacy test. You'd have to verify if you're employed and own property and are dependent on the state or not. In the midterms, we had somebody who won the election who was dead, and people still mindlessly voted for him. Why was he even on the ballot? Under my regime, that's not happening. Same with Fetterman. Politicians would be forced to give up health reports, and they'd have to take mental acuity tests. By the time we truly saw the extent of Fetterman's stroke, there had already been 500,000 early votes cast. Well, that's insane. That needs to end. election day would be election day, not election week or month. Campaign finance reform would have to take place. Super PACs would be dissolved. Lobbying would be severely restricted, if not completely outlawed. Term limits for Congress. The 17th Amendment would be repealed. Hell, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed, but that's wishful thinking. Those all seem extreme, but it's only because we've fallen so short of where we should be. Those things are actually common sense, and so they would be entirely rejected and resisted, which means that we need to clear them out first and start over. That's all it ever comes back to for me. Clear them out. As I've said before, all the peaceful solutions should have been done decades ago. And now it's all too late. It's like cramming for a test 2 hours before it's due. Yes, studying works, but not like that. Yes, these ideas would work, but not like that. And so we're left with one really disturbing option. Clear them out. Anyways, that's all the time I have for today. If you enjoyed this video and type of content I'm making, consider giving this video a like or subscribing. I will see you all in the next video. Peace.